Well, as I said, good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending what time it is where you are. This is the third of the 3 workshops on the use of corpora for lesson planning for English language teachers in Indonesia and elsewhere. And on this session today, we're interested in what you managed to do so far in terms of putting your second lesson plans together and how and where the use of corpora can somehow assist with the actual lesson planning, either through the teachers making some kind of materials that have come from corpora, or whether the students themselves have been given a task where they have to use a corpus to find out some information. So this session will be in 3 parts. The first part will just be a quick overview of some different approaches to the kind of tasks that students might be asked to do, or as well as to summarize just some of the main ideas that came out of the first lesson plans that you sent to me. And then we'll move on in the second part to introduce your own new versions of the lesson plans and to just go through one by one with each of you very quickly to listen to your idea about how and where you decided to use the corpus, and to provide some suggestions about whether that would be doable or how we could expand that idea in some way. And then in the third part, we'll have a kind of group discussion about the feasibility of implementing this kind of technology within the Indonesian context or outside, thinking about some of the enablers and barriers to this kind of approach and this kind of activity in your current teaching and learning setup. So that's the structure of today's workshop. And we'll begin here with just a reminder about what data-driven learning is and how corpora can be used for language teaching. And we already mentioned in the first session that corpora can be used indirectly by the teacher to generate teaching materials for their students, or the direct use of corpora, otherwise known as data-driven learning, where the teachers are showing the learners some kind of corpus output as a result of one of their own queries, or the students themselves are querying the corpus to find some information that will help either the teacher and or the students to meet the lesson objectives. And there are 2 ways currently of applying that in language teaching and learning. That's the hands-off version, sometimes known as soft DDL, where the learners are provided with teaching materials that have been adapted from a corpus by teachers. And we've said previously that in the beginning stages, where learners are not used to the software, or where the English level perhaps is at too low a proficiency to be able to really understand a lot of what is going on, where the first language perhaps might not be allowed in the classroom. But the teachers are producing teaching materials or lists of concordances or information about their input texts based on the teacher's corpus consultation. Or after a little bit of training in the various kinds of software that you think you might want to use with your students or that your students might find useful, we can then switch to that hands-on DDL where the learners get to consult the corpus directly. But really, we get to that stage after after the teachers in particular are a little bit more comfortable with consulting a corpus on their own and understanding the various corpus functions so that they can then feel comfortable passing on that knowledge to their learners. And as I mentioned a number of times already, after a very, very short training period is generally required. And after a short time, chances are your learners will be querying that corpus and being able to do things with that data that you might not have thought of before. And very soon they will be showing you different kinds of information and different kinds of statistics or examples of language that maybe you hadn't thought of before. The younger learners take to these things very quickly. So this is just a refresher from a slide in week 1 about why we want to do this. And it is just a good idea to just kind of refresh our memory a little bit about why do we want to do this? I mean, obviously in your lesson planning, you've been told to do it at the moment. You've been told to input some kind of corpus activity to complete your assessments. But why do we want the children to have access to this kind of resource? And really, it's to put them in greater control of the language that's out there, so that they're at the same time as learning about language, they're also learning how to analyze data, how to manipulate data, how to retrieve information from different kinds of data sets. And the skills that they're gaining as a result of doing this will help them not just for learning language, but they'll also help them in many of their other subject areas too. Specific to language, corpora provide authentic examples of language in use. So not the kind of contrived textbook language that you normally get. Corpora allow learners to confirm or reject their intuitions about language, either as they're writing something or they're doing their homework, they're responding to written corrective feedback from their teacher. And it's also stimulating an interest in language and discourse and different kinds of registers and genres beyond what the teacher can provide themselves, and helping them to stimulate, hopefully, their motivation, their self-efficacy, and so on as they develop a range of skills that opens up language in a certain way and helps them to solve some of the common problems that they have with language, and hopefully relieve some of that frustration as part of the language learning process themselves without having to ask the teacher for all the information or relying on the teacher as the only source of information that's out there. Now, here are some approaches to students' corpus consultation that we hadn't discussed in previous weeks. A quite old approach to the analysis of grammar in particular is that of Carter and McCarthy's 3 I's. And this has since been extended to corpus consultation. And the 3 I's that are available are firstly illustration, then interaction, then induction. So this is very similar to the PPP model of language teaching, that present, practice, produce. that you may have heard of on your language teacher training. And in many contexts around the world, this is still the kind of prevailing methodology or pedagogical approach to your standard lesson. And having seen many of your lesson plans, half of them still follow this kind of present, practice, produce approach in terms of the sequencing and the scripting of your lesson plans. But this can be extended to corpus consultation in the following ways, in that illustration part can involve the learners looking at the data, either with the teacher providing them with that data, or the learners themselves exploring the corpus to illustrate some of the language features that they're trying to learn about in their lesson objectives. So many of you in your objectives have put things like to learn about present simple tense. So then the teacher will provide them with the data, or the learners will go into the corpus to explore the use of present simple tense individually, or maybe in pairs. And when they finish that, they will then have some kind of intuition based on the evidence that they've been exposed to about how that grammar item works and whether the kind of words that can go into a particular grammatical construction. And then once they've done that, that might be then a good time for interaction, where they might present some of the evidence that they managed to find from the corpus together with their peers or with their teacher. They may share concordance examples. They might share some alternatives to some of the target vocabulary items that they've been asked to find. And they can share those together with their peers and with the teacher in the class. Then, once the sharing process has completed at that point, the learners can be encouraged by the teacher to get to the third step, that of induction, where the class as a whole can reflect on the rule that they've been trying to understand. And I've seen a lot of this in your lesson plans, where you'll kind of have a part in the script where you'll say, okay, students, so in summary, the present simple tense is used to give directions. Do we agree? And then you've written in, yes, teacher, we understand. And it's that part of the lesson plan where after the activity or after having shared their information with each other from the corpus, then it's time to reflect on what they found and to try to consolidate that information into their knowledge or understanding of that particular grammatical construct or phrase, idiom, or whatever it is that they're trying to learn. In slightly later research, Bernardini mentioned two kinds of learners. I left the final one on the other slide, actually, which I might just move up here. Oh no, sorry, I'll leave that where it was. But Bernardini mentioned that one way to think about what the learner is doing is to think of the learner as a traveler. So in terms of how you see your students engaging with corpus data and what you think they will get out of this, Bernardini notes that what matters is not so much the start or end point of an investigation. So it's not really the actual answers that they managed to get as a result of consulting the corpus, but rather what is important for this kind of teaching approach is the choices made by the learners, different choices made, the strategies adopted, the experience gained, and the findings along the way. So while in your lesson planning you may be worried about, can my students get the right answer or not by consulting the corpus? If we take Bernardini's analogy here as the learner of a traveler seriously, maybe it's not so important to think about whether your learners can get the right answer or not, but it might be more important to just give them the opportunity to take a little journey, let them try an experiment, to reflect on what they found, and based on that experience, then to ask them what they learned from that and how it was useful. Now, Bernardini points out two kinds of tasks, and this distinction might become later, might become important later when you go back to work on your lesson plans after today's session. The first kind of task that Bernardini talks about is that of convergent tasks. And a convergent task is one that you set for your learners. Your learners have access to the same data and they should all arrive at the same outcome or the same answer. This kind of task allows the teacher to ensure that the learners are applying or using corpus techniques appropriately and that they're able to follow step-by-step instructions so that they all come to the same end point. They all come to the same conclusion. So that would be a convergent task where there is one right answer and the goal of the teacher is to guide the students through the various steps needed to get to that one right answer. So maybe for your corpus tasks that you're going to present today, some of those will be convergent, and that's fine. And in the beginning stages, it may be beneficial to focus more on that kind of task so that learners get comfortable with the various steps involved. But a different kind of task as proposed by Bernardini is that of divergent tasks. And under divergent tasks, different people are working on the same data, but they may arrive at different answers. So here we don't want the learners to actually all get the same answer. We want them to discover something for themselves and to explore the data themselves and to find an example or some information or a construction that is unique to them, something that they wanted to find, and then they can present and share that with their peers. So that's just a little note there about the difference between convergent tasks and divergent tasks. And within your lesson planning, it might be good to have one of each type, or depending on the kind of learners that you're working with, to maybe stick to convergent only task, or to go ahead and use divergent only tasks. But each one has its place in the curriculum. Now, another approach couple of approaches were found in another excellent research paper by Kennedy and Michelli 2010. And the first one of these is pattern hunting. So pattern hunting is where the students are being encouraged to consult the corpus when, for example, they don't know what to write, or they don't have the right kind of words to express what they want to say. So here the learners will then go into the corpus and try to find some vocabulary or grammatical constructions that might be present within the kind of data that they're being exposed to. And they will look at the concordance lines for potentially useful patterns that will help them. So for example, many of you have talked in your lesson plans about particular genres or registers that you want your learners to know more about, such as information texts or instruction texts and so on. And without reading 100 or 1,000 of those texts, maybe the learners then can go into the corpus and try to find some of the key words or key phrases within that kind of text from a corpus that they could then use in their own writing. This kind of work is divergent, to follow Bernardini's previous divergent-convergent dichotomy. Even when starting with the same lookup, the same kind of corpus query that they input into the system, the learners could take different paths in exploring the data and come up with different outcomes. So if you've got a class of 30 students and you ask them to find some patterns in a corpus of narrative text, for example, then you might get 30 different examples and 30 different constructions that come out of that. But those would all be valid and perhaps well used within that target genre or register. So that's pattern hunting. And it may be that the kind of tasks that you talk about today follow that kind of model. Or, casting our mind back just now to convergent tasks, Kennedy and Michelli talk about pattern defining. Here, we do have a specific target pattern in mind for use at a particular point in the text. And in your lesson plans, I've read that many of you are looking for particular construction like infinitive constructions, where you have subject is going to, okay? And then you want your learners to learn more about that construction and to pull out some examples that will define that construction. So for example, which preposition is required after a verb in a certain context? So going out, for example. Can I find 10 examples of going out? And then as a result of reading those examples, can I then define what going out means? But we take all the students through those operations together to learn about that one construction, that specific target that we have in mind. And that's pattern defining. So I think in terms of your lesson plans, some of your lesson plans have opportunities for pattern hunting. Some of your lesson plans have opportunities for pattern defining. And some of your lesson plans have opportunities for both kinds of work. So it'd be interesting to see when we get the final lesson plans by the deadline, which I think was the 28th, I believe, then we may get to see both kinds of tasks included in your lesson plans. Another term from Kennedy and Michelli is that of learner as chef. And this is very similar to that learner as traveler analogy from Bernardini that we talked about before, in that apprentice chefs, they develop expertise from reading recipes and from observing master chefs as they cook. So what are chefs learning? Well, if they're following the recipes, then they are learning the rules of the dish. But at the same time, a master chef will take a standard recipe and do various certain things to that to make it unique, to make it more delicious in terms of the presentation of the meal and so on. So there's some element of creativity there, the making of new dishes based on old recipes. And according to Kennedy Michelli, this is a good analogy for what you should expect from your learners as they engage in corpus consultation. Yes, they can follow specific patterns and try to look for specific rules, but at the same time, you hope that they put their individual stamp on what they're doing and surprise you with examples from the data that you might not have thought of before. Be able to find collocates or variants of certain grammatical constructions that you hadn't considered, but the ones that the learners had found themselves and tried to take ownership of. Okay, so this is just now an overview of a few ways that in your specific lesson plan, so all of the first ones that I read, both the primary and the secondary school teachers, just a summary of how corpora can mainly be used in the lessons that you were showing in the plans that you sent to me. So first of all, the corpus can be used by teachers to improve some of the more contrived textbook examples that some of you were using in order to replace these with more authentic examples from real texts. Not only that, but many of you at the beginning of your lesson plans had like a set of key vocabulary to look for, or maybe one or two key constructions. But the learners could go into a corpus as a kind of way of enhancing learning about those rules, or they can go on to find alternative answers to the vocabulary that you'd set, or alternative answers to some of the answers that were in some of the activities that you were making. In doing this, they will expand their vocabulary and knowledge of chunking, for example, if they're looking for multi-word units or 2 or 3 or 4 word level, and they will improve their autonomy and IT skills at the same time. Another area is to provide authentic examples and to make the learning of grammatical rules more fun. In many of your lesson plans, the teacher presents the information in a form of a dialogue with the students where the teacher will say, okay, so what tense do we use when we want to talk about what we're doing in the future? And then the learner will say, the present progressive tense, teacher, which never happens, by the way. The learners will never do that. They'll just look at you and go, I don't know. That's usually what they do. And then the teacher kind of presents these examples and then at the end summarizes the rule for the students. And the students go, oh yes, very good teacher, now we understand. And especially if you're working with younger learners, say the primary school level, again, you might be surprised if they have that kind of meta language knowledge to be able to think about rules in that way. And for secondary school students, they might just find that kind of very teacher-led explanation quite boring. You may find many of your students sleeping in the classrooms. Certainly been my experience working in many schools around the world. When you just try to relay grammar rules in that very static way. Here, the teacher can provide corpus examples that support these rules, or maybe provide some exceptions to the rules. Or even better, the students can be instructed to use a corpus to prove the rules or disprove them. And this whole process of getting the students to consult the corpus will make that kind of rule learning much more interactive and hopefully more meaningful as a result. So putting them or giving them the opportunity to learn about this themselves without the teacher having to explain it. Now, many of you had also included writing tasks into your lesson plans, which is great. And whenever there's any kind of writing task to be done, the learners can consult the corpus as a reference resource to check their writing as they go along. Or preferably if you're doing multiple drafts of writing with your students, which I'm not sure if your curriculum allows for this, but generally there will be opportunities for the teacher to provide feedback on students' work. The students can then look at that feedback and try to then consult the corpus to resolve any errors that they might have had. And that's really the main focus of the online course that you've been taking, especially in modules 3 and 4, about how to take teachers' feedback and turn that into useful corpus queries. So certainly as a tool, as a reference resource during writing is very straightforward. And then learning about genre and register. And all of the secondary school teacher lesson plans I read were doing this. And also some of the primary school lesson plans I read were also involved awareness of genre and register features. And obviously last week, when we looked at building and constructing and analyzing your own corpora and comparing that with other corpora, it's a very data-driven way, a more fun and interactive way, and also improving their IT skills at the same time to learn about genre and register with reference to corpus data. Whether they're building their own corpora by searching the web, or whether the teacher's building a corpora by having a collection of text that they might get from somewhere, it's a great way to make learning about genre and register more interactive. Now, very briefly here are some of the other lesson objectives, and I went through some of the lesson plans and just pulled out some of these, so you might recognize some of these as yours, but these were quite common among all the lesson plans I found. And then here you can see how I've addressed these in terms of how the corpus might be used to address those particular objectives. So here we've got one to analyze social functions, text structure, and linguistic elements based on descriptive texts. And again, if you do have a specific text, like the one about Bunaken National Park, which was the one used in this objective, then you can run that through Versatext or Voyant tools, as we did last week. Or you can go and make a corpus of descriptive text if you have enough of those available, or you can find them from somewhere and compare that with another corpus as a reference corpus. And as I already mentioned, if you're going to be getting your students to write, then they can use the corpus as a reference resource during this process. Here's another one that I pulled out: to understand the generic structure of a hortatory text by discussing with the teacher and peers. But here, This could be part of that, the 3 I's, for example, where the students explore the corpus of the text, and then they get together in pairs or groups to discuss what they managed to find before presenting their findings back to the whole class. Secondly, here, students are able to understand the generic structure of a text by classifying which steps belong to which part of the generic structure. But once you have a corpus of that kind of structure, you might use the corpus to reveal the actual language or expressions that are used in those steps. So rather than kind of systemic functional linguistics type approach where you classify the steps and just give the steps a name, rather you're actually finding the exact language that allows those steps to occur. That's something that in Australia is an issue for me. In Australia, they still follow very much a systemic functional linguistics approach to primary education, for example, where there's lots of classifying going on, but not necessarily giving students the opportunity to actually get the language features. So that's hopefully one of my jobs in the near future. So here's another one. For example, students are able to comprehend the vocabulary in the text by discussing the meaning with their peer groups. And again, if you make a corpus of these, students can explore the meaning themselves. And in many of your lesson plans, there's a section in the dialogue somewhere like, what does this word mean? And again, then the teacher says, well, this word means this, 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 this. And then you might think the students are looking at you going, well, what does that mean? I don't understand what that means either. So that's the point where you'll get the students to go into the corpus to see if they can consult the data so that they can figure out what the word means on their own. And then they might come to different conclusions. And then it's up to the teacher to try to point them more in the right direction. Then, if you have a specific construction, for example, here the infinitive construction, learners can easily extract and analyze specific constructions by using a corpus, as long as you're able to generate the appropriate corpus query. So here is another objective where the teacher was giving steps to the students. But instead of the teacher providing the information, students could search a corpus of subtext for the same information, making that process more interactive. Or here, one of the learners had put a collaborative writing task or collaborative fill-in-the-blank task. And here you could have one group member be like the kind of corpus detective, helping out the other students if they were not sure about a word or construction. So hopefully that's given you a few ideas about some of the general approaches to setting up corpus tasks and what you can expect your learners to do. And to just briefly outline again, based on your lesson plans, some practical tips of how we can use corpora to meet specific lesson objectives that you've highlighted in your lesson plan so far. So then that leads us to part 2 of today's session. And this is where we will now take individual requests. So I think this bit will probably take quite a while. So before the session, I asked you to kind of come up with the answers to these questions so that you had them ready before this session, so that you can then try to briefly explain your response to these 5 questions, and then we can see whether that sounds like that's going to be a good idea, and if so, how we might improve that or extend what it is that you were trying to do. So I don't have a particular order for this, so I guess the way that we'll do it is if I stop sharing my screen, I think we'll take the Indonesian participants first. I know that we have, and those from Atma Jaya specifically. I know that we do have other guests today who are not from there, but we'll only deal with you if you have time, if we have time left, as the focus today is really on the Indonesian participants from Atma Jaya. So otherwise, if we do run out of time, you can just send me your lesson plan by email or your corpus idea by email, and then I'll address it by personal correspondence. So again, I don't have a particular order here. So if Luciana is still there, she may want to actually provide
Yes,
some
Peter.
instruction about how the students will proceed with this part.
Okay, actually, we have asked the students to prepare the answers to your questions. So right now I'm asking, I'm asking one of them to start first, and hopefully the others will follow.
Okay.
Rangga, I think you can start because you have prepared, all the students have prepared the answers to your questions.
Okay.
Then based on your sharing with Dr. Crosswise, and then later you will get some sharing also. Okay, students, you can start now. Thanks, Peter.
Okay, so I guess if there's not a set order, then maybe one way to do it might be to work down the order in alphabetical order. So the first name on my list would be Araphelia. Are you there, Araphelia? Are you there? Are you able to unmute? If not, I'll come back to you in a moment and we'll go to Axel. Axel, if you're there, can you unmute your microphone? And then you can share your idea for the corpus activity. No response there. Azaria then, Sonia? I'll come back to the other two later. Okay.
Yes, this is Azaria Sonia.
Yes, that's great. How are you?
I'm good.
All right. So just in terms of your response, again, I'll just share the screen so you can see. So it's these 5 questions, the objectives of your lesson plan, etc., etc. So if we just go through your prepared response, and then we'll take it from there.
So I will start with the first question. What are the objectives of my LP? So my topic is descriptive text, and the objectives of my LP are the students are able to determine, analyze, and make a simple descriptive text that relates to tourist attractions in Indonesia. And the second, the corpus helped me to achieve the goals of the objectives number 1, 2, 3, and 5. And
okay,
the third,
so what were those objectives again in brief?
The students are able to determine, analyze, and make a simple descriptive text that relates to tourist attractions in Indonesia.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what data were you going to use, and what software were you thinking of using?
So I use the first text to the lesson plan.
Yep.
So in objectives number 1 and 2, the corpus, the first text corpus, helps me and the students to find like the keywords or main idea of the paragraph by using the features concordance.
Yes.
And also these features help the students to find the answer to comprehension questions such as where is the location of, for example, Lake Toba.
Yep.
And in objectives number 3 and 5, the students can use the corpus to write the descriptive text. And the students can input their text to check whether they already have the adjective word in the descriptive text, like as the language features of the descriptive text.
Okay. So in terms of the data itself, so you're using only the the extended reading text, or are you going to try to get more data from of that particular genre from another source?
I use the extensive reading text.
Okay.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's okay. And you can still use the concordance function of Versatext to be able to help you to do that. But then if you want the students to be able to expand upon that a little bit and try to generalize to that genre in terms of the genre features, it might be good to try to collect a few more texts and to add them to the corpus as well. Similar text to the extended reading ones that you'd already added to the corpus.
All right.
So that's just one idea, and I guess this applies to all the other people listening as well. In that, yes, the Versatext is good for getting the features out of the reading text that you were using, but then if you're going to go ahead and start getting the students to use concordances, then you're going to need a bit more data, because otherwise, if you're doing a particular corpus query, you might find that in your reading text, you only have like one example of that vocabulary, or one example or a few examples of that particular construction that you're interested in. So if you only have those reading texts, then you're not going to get many results when you do a concordance. So it might be better to use those reading texts as a starting point. But then when you want the students to try to explore concordances more, maybe to try to add a few more texts, similar text to that data set, so that when they run their queries, they're going to have not just one example, but they might get 10 or 20 because you provided them with more data.
All right, I got it.
Okay, so you continued. Had you described everything that you wanted the students to do?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's all from me.
Great. Okay, and the outcome? The expected outcome.
For the outcome?
Yes.
Yes. So I have that the students can use the corpus better to make a good descriptive text.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so again, we'll come back to you later in part 3 about how easy or difficult you think that's going to be able to do based on your knowledge of teaching and your knowledge of your students and the knowledge of the technology in the Indonesian context. So that's going to be interesting to come back and listen to your opinion about that. Okay, but that was a good start. Let's move on now. Did we get Araphelia in the end? Are you there now? If you are, can you unmute? Okay, Axel. Axel Christian Ardi.
Sir,
Yes.
Araphilia's microphone is not working.
Okay, yep, but then she can send by email. And Axel? Okay, so we've gone through Azaria. Next on my list is Cut. Are you there, Cut?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so let's hear about your how you're going to try to incorporate corpora into your lesson plan.
Well, I'm gonna actually use the corpus for my lesson plan for my students. And also it's the students have to find the correct grammatical for the past tense in irregular and regular verbs using corpus when the topic is news item.
Okay.
Yes, and also the objectives were my objective that the students can organize the disorder paragraphs that the teacher has distributed from the disorder paragraph into the good news item paragraph, and also they can recognize the grammatical errors, and also they can create their own news item text.
Okay, so how are they going to use the corpus, and what kind of software are they going to use?
Okay, so for the software is Sketch Engine,
Okay.
and then they are going to focus the grammar mistake that will be in the news item text, which is simple past tense and irregular verbs.
Mm-hmm.
And in this activity, the teacher will distribute the worksheet to the students. And in that worksheet, there are some grammatical errors. For example, residents were taught the explosion, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
While it actually has to be residents were told the explosion.
Yes.
And in here, the students can explore by themselves about the irregular and regular verbs in simple past tense using corpus.
Very good. So, I mean, presumably they'll be looking at the frequency information of the erroneous searches, and then based on that, they'll be noticing, okay, this construction seems to be an error. So how do I solve the problem, right? So that's a really good way of getting them to confirm that something's an error or not is by relying on that frequency information from the corpus. So that sounds like a very good idea. And it's a good way of making that task more interactive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I suppose the inspected outcome is?
Is the students can create their own news item text using past tense, using correct past tense.
Yeah. And then as they're doing the writing of that, they will presumably be going back into the corpus to check as they're doing the writing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of opportunities there. One to complete the worksheet task. And again, it's great because you've got the corpus. And the one thing that I did want to stress to everybody that was important when you were doing these lesson plans is that the lesson plan shouldn't be focused on the corpus, and that the corpus is not the objective of the lesson plan, but rather that you have your objectives that you have to meet as part of your curriculum requirements, and then you're using the corpus to help you meet those objectives. So I think that what you presented there is a very good way of how you can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'll refer one more time to Axel. If Axel doesn't respond this time, then I'll have to, I'll say, send me an email with your answers there. So we've gone through Azaria. Cut. Next is Diana. Diana Inda Pangestu. Are you there? Are you able to chat?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Diana, you might have to turn your microphone up.
Hello?
I can hear you, but it's very quiet.
Hello?
Can you try one more time?
Hello?
That's better. I can hear you now.
Okay.
So tell me about your lesson plan. What are the objectives?
So it's actually my objective for my lesson plan is students are able to make a short paragraph about future plans. Yes.
Okay.
That's and how will the corpus help me to meet my objective? Is corpus really help me to get an idea? It's like a reference source.
Okay.
And in my lesson plan, I'm going to use foreign tools or first set tags to get the detailed linguistic information.
Yep.
So and then for in the corpus task, maybe I can check the collocates from the text first because and then I can find the appropriate rules like be going to because in my lesson plan I'm going to teach about be going to, so maybe I can find the appropriate rules first.
Yeah.
Then I want to ask students to find the word that related to the
the grammar.
Yep.
And then also I want my student to get a detailed linguistic information.
Yep.
So in the outcome, I want my student to be able to use a corpus as their reference during their writing task.
Yep. Good. Okay. So yours sounds like very much in the pattern defining mode where you've got a construction that you want the learners to use or to learn about. That's that be going to construction, and then they're going to go in and find examples of that from the data. And again, as I mentioned previously, use of Versatext or Voyant tools on the extended reading is fine. But then if you want them to go in and try to find some concordances or to find different examples of that construction, then you're just going to need a little bit more data. So then you'll want to make sure that you've got maybe 10 texts or 20 texts that then your students can go in and play around with. But otherwise, that all sounds very reasonable.
Yes, okay.
Okay, so well done.
We got it.
Very interesting. And I do look forward to seeing all of these completed lesson plans when they're done. Now, let's have Francisca.
Thank you, sir.
Yep, no worries. Thank you very much. Francisca, are you there? Are you able to chat?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so let's go through your lesson plan objectives.
The whole objective or only with corpus?
Well, what are you trying to do in general? So yeah,
Well,
give me the main objectives of your lesson plan.
Okay, I have 4 objectives. The first one, the students are able to understand the concept of generic structure by making a simple example of explanation. So I want them to make a simple explanation text by presenting in front of the class before the learning process.
Okay.
And then the second one, the students are able to analyze the structure of explanation text from Google. They can find by themselves the meaning, the structure, the generic structure of the text. And then I will give them guided questions like, what is explanation text?
Yep.
How does it? What is the generic structure and others? And then the third one, identify the synonyms or some words on the explanation text that I will give.
Yep.
And then they have to find the synonyms or the synonyms on the corpus. I will use Cal because Cal is really easy for the new learners, not new learners, young learners like that.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the last one for the writing activity, they have to create an explanation text.
Yes.
And they will send by email to me. And then I think that's all the objectives.
Okay. Yeah. So mainly for finding the synonyms in the data, you're going to use Skell.
Yes.
And so Skell actually has a function in it that says similar words, and it will actually produce a kind of word cloud that does provide actual kind of synonyms. Not all of them are valid, but it is a kind of useful tool. And Voyant tools as well, I think, does something similar. So if you look here at the screen share, for example, I type in research. If you click on the similar words function, it actually does give you words that are associated with research, and some of these are synonyms, and students can then go in and click on some of those and explore them. Or as you say, they can, if they're looking at 2-word or 3-word constructions, for example, they can go in, use wildcards to find which words would fill a particular slot in a set phrase or something like that. So that would be very interesting. And then, of course, if they're going to be doing any writing, they can use the corpus as they're writing to check any kind of vocabulary or phrases that they want to use.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
What is that? From the reading activity, I hope the students can learn how to find the proper or suitable vocabulary for the writing activity.
Yes, very good.
For writing activity, I will give inputs how them to find the suitable words for their writing activity like that.
Sure, yeah. So one thing, and I've actually seen this in a few of the lesson plans as well, is that one of the objectives is for this to find the generic structure, right? And a lot of you have said that in your plan. So you can find generic structures with corpora, but that requires quite a complex procedure where you would need to extract like a variety of key multi-word units by comparing one corpus with a reference corpus, and it might be a little bit hard. So, however, if the teacher can use a kind of like systemic functional linguistic approach and like categorize like the move structure or the generic structure and divide that up into little categories, but then your corpus can be used then to explore those different categories. So say, for example, if you were doing an explanation text and part one of the explanation was like background and then background information. And then you could use the corpus then to find examples of the sentences and the grammar used in providing background information. And then step two might be like some kind of like a recipe, like where you're using imperative constructions like mix 200 grams of sugar with milk or something like that. And then you would, once you've kind of labeled what is happening at each step of that generic structure, you can then use the corpus then to find examples of the words or vocabulary that are common to those kind of classifications within a generic structure. So there you're kind of combining like a kind of top-down text analysis, discourse analysis type of thing that a lot of writing teachers like to do. And you're combining that then with exploring the corpus to look at some of the language features that are involved in those specific steps. And that's another way that you can use a corpus to explore generic structure. Okay?
Okay.
So it's kind of, you're using discourse analysis or systemic functional linguistics type to look at the big categories of the generic structure, and then using the corpus to investigate each individual category. That's probably a bit easier to handle, but it's just another suggestion. But it sounds like already, like for your learners, one thing I forgot to ask everybody to do when they were doing this, just to mention, is yours for primary or secondary school?
For me, it's for secondary school.
For secondary school, okay.
Yeah.
So, but at least the learners should be able to handle the corpus task that you've asked them to do there.
Yeah.
With some initial training.
Them.
Yeah. So again, we'll talk in part 3 about whether you think they could actually do this or not, or what you might need to allow that to happen. But for now, let's move on to our next participant. So we've got Gabriella Sandra. Are you there? Are you able to chat? If not, Gabriella Cynthia K, are you there? Again, if we don't get round to you today, she's just unmuted.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. So let's go through your lesson plan objectives.
Okay, so for my objectives, I have two objectives. So the first one would be students are able to write recipes using some given clues. So, and then second, students are able to use simple present tense to compose recipes in good grammar.
Yep. So how will the corpus help you to do that?
I decided to use Sketch Engine to help. One of the activity that I created is actually about vocabulary challenge. So that since the activity required the students to create a sentence out of the chosen words, so I would ask the students to work in a group and look up the words on the Sketch Engine on how the words were used, and so that they would have an idea of the meaning of the word itself and how to use them.
Okay, so yeah, I mean that fits that the kind of pattern defining mode that we were looking at, or where the learners will discuss in groups and maybe choose their own example from that data,
Yes, that's
discuss it, and then come back and discuss the ideas as a class, sharing those different examples so that they can make a decision on the meaning there. So that would be following that kind of 3 eyes pattern that we looked at before in terms of
yeah, also I feel like the students can use the corpus also during writing to check on their intuitions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So any time there's any kind of writing that they'll be doing, just having their corpus there as like together with their dictionary or their translation website, just having that as an option is always going to be incredibly useful. But yeah, certainly it seems that what you're doing there is following that kind of 3 eyes pattern where they're going in, they're looking at the data, they're discussing with their peers, and then when they're done, they kind of make a rule about the meaning of the expression. So that sounds like a very good use of the data. Was that for primary or secondary school?
This one is for primary school.
Okay. Great. So thanks for sharing that one.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
No worries. Gabriella, Sandra, are you back? Are you able to chat? So again, for everybody who I haven't been able to chat, if you just send me your ideas by email, then I can address them later. Gracia, Carolina.
Okay, hi, sir.
Hello there. So what are the objectives for your lesson?
For my lesson, the objectives, I have 4 objectives. The 4 activities. So for the warm-up, the students are able to identify animals based on the description provided, because they will have the fun activity Jeopardy. And also they are able to classify the diet, habitats of animals, write short, simple descriptive text about certain animals, and also create a short descriptive text for the evaluation with the correct structure and language features.
Okay, so I think this is what my daughter's doing this week actually at school, talking about how bilbies and how they catch prey and what they look like and that kind of thing. So it sounds very familiar. Now, how are you planning to use a corpus to help with this lesson?
So actually in this case, both teacher and students will use the corpus, especially scale. For the teacher, I will use it to create the example descriptive text about rabbit. So when I open scale and I type rabbit, I can have around 40 example sentences about rabbits. So it can give me inspirations and also confirm again my intuitions. And also I use the word sketch, because by using the word sketch, I can know that what verbs and nouns are usually used with rabbits. So I use it to make the example text. And for the students, later I will introduce Cal to them so that they can do the same thing like me, making a descriptive text about an animal with the help of Scal.
Okay. Yep. So, and it's great that you're going from the stage that you're going through and showing the students the information that you're getting from Scale first, and then based on that, then allowing them to have the opportunity to explore either a rabbit or maybe a different animal, to see if that can help them with their writing. So it sounds like a very just a more interesting way of getting them to learn about the animals. So I guess the only thing is whether Skell has enough examples related to animals. I'm sure they do. It's a very large corpus. Otherwise, if you can get some kind of text which deals like Wikipedia, for example, that one will probably also have lots of references to many different kinds of animals as well.
Ah, yes.
So, but I think Skell should probably be okay for most major animals. If it's an animal that's a bit rarer, you might struggle. Unless you're using maybe a Wikipedia corpus or something like that.
Yeah, so actually I've tried to use Sketch Engine before, and it's easier to use Scale because when it comes to animal,
yes,
Scale has better examples.
Yes, that's right, and that's definitely going to happen. So if you used, for example, within Sketch Engine, and you were not using the BAWE corpus, so for example, you might have been using N1010 or British National Corpus 2014. When we had that 30-day trial that we had for last week's lesson, it actually gave you access to many different, much larger corpora. So the BAWE, you're right, it's only 6 million words. And I say only 6 million words, because that's still a lot of words. But if you're searching for something quite specific, 6 million words maybe isn't so great. So certainly I think going into Skell might be another option. I think Skell's about 1 billion words, they said. So
yeah.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really straightforward and simple but effective use of the corpus for your lesson. So that's really good work.
Thank you.
Now, Indri, are you there?
I'm here, sir, but I'm a lecturer, so I'm.
Oh, you're just listening in. That's okay. No worries. Right, who was next then? Jessica Tiara.
Oh, hi, sir.
Hello there.
Hello.
So tell me about your lesson plan. What are the objectives? What is it that you want to be? What is it you want to try to do with these students? And are you at primary or secondary school level?
I'm from secondary school.
Okay.
And the objectives of my lesson plan is to comprehend the definition of hortatory exposition text and its structure.
Okay.
Analyze the generic structure of the text and compose their own text.
Yes. Okay. So how do you plan to help? How do you plan to use the corpus to help you to do this?
Actually, on my draft, I wanted to do a jigsaw activity with the students, but the teacher will provide that text, and while the others listen. And then during that jigsaw activity, the teachers will ask the students to produce their own version of the text of what they heard, but they still need to use the corpus to look for the context of the word. I haven't included that on my draft lesson plan though.
Okay. So it sounds more like a work in progress, but I mean, what kind of text was it again that you were using?
I was planning to use hortatory exposition text, which is more too persuasive.
Yep. And was there a specific grammar or vocabulary focus that was included in your lesson plan?
I would say that modals and simple present and simple past tense were the grammatical features.
Okay. So again, if you've got that kind of specific thing that you're looking for in the data, for example, modals, for example, some kind of warm-up activity where students are going into the corpus and looking at modals or modal collocates within those particular kind of texts might be a useful thing, just to kind of warm them up a bit before they then go in ahead into that jigsaw task might be a good idea.
So before the
So
jigsaw.
as a kind of like pre-task to your jigsaw task. So it sounds like your jigsaw task is like the main thing, and that's fine. But maybe before you do that, it might be, you may want to get students to look at some concordances with, say, particular modals. So maybe to get the students to understand the differences between two modals that they might get confused about, like could or would or should or something like that, to try to get the meaning. Just a little kind of focus on form, focus on vocabulary at the start of the lesson involving the corpus. Then they can get on to do the jigsaw task. And then later on, where they go to write their own sections, again, they can use the corpus as a reference resource. So those are just some ideas. But again, I think yours is still kind of work in progress at the moment. So maybe once you finalize your decision, you can send that across by email then.
All right, sir.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. I'll tell you what, we've gone on for quite a while here. So why don't we take a break for 10 minutes? I'm just going to pause the recording as well. And when we come back, then we'll get through the rest of this list. Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Just
sir.
Yep. No worries. Take a 10-minute break, everybody. And we'll leave it there for a moment. Okay, everyone. Well, hope you had a good break there, and we'll go straight back into the session now, going through the list of participants, and I believe we were up to Chrysanthi. Are you there, Chrysanthi?
Yes, sir. But I'm also a lecturer.
A lecturer, I thought so, actually, as I said it. Okay, but nice to meet you anyway. So, Maria Stefani?
Yes, sir, I'm here. So,
okay, tell me about the objectives for your lesson plan.
Okay, so my lesson plan is for primary school, and the objective, I have two. The first is to write the simple past tense sentences correctly based on what the teacher says, because the skills is writing, and then the second is to write their own story using the simple past tense. And then how will the corpus help in my teaching? In my teaching is I will ask the students to open the corpus to see the example of the sentence based on the word that they will use. So in class, I will show the list of the word that they will use to create their own story, and then I will ask them to open the scale. It's like to see the example to make the sentence based on the word. So for example, I give them the word when, and then I will ask the students to, so the corpus that I use is scale, and then I will ask the students to type when, and then the students can see a lot of the example of using the word when.
Okay. So remind me again, what kind of text were the students trying to do?
So for the text, is narrative text.
A narrative text, okay.
So I will give them this the example of the narrative text. So the title is Cinderella, but in the end, I ask them to create their own story, but using the simple past tense.
Okay. So I mean, that sounds great. My only worry is that it might be better to use a corpus of similar stories to Cinderella, because the examples that you get from Skell may be taken from a range of different registers or genres. So you might get like scientific texts in there. You might get like historic texts within different disciplines like history or physics or chemistry or so on. And it may be a little difficult for students who are trying to write like fairy tales type stories. So I'm wondering whether it might be better to get a collection of such stories together and to upload that maybe to Sketch Engine, or to use Voyant tools or Versatext or Antconc, because then the examples, if you just want the students to get examples of these target words, but your focus is on like fairy stories, narrative texts, it's going to be the examples that you get are going to be much better for your learners if they're taken from similar kinds of stories, so that they can see how those words are used in that specific context. So I'm just worried that with Scale, the examples that they get back might be a bit tough for them, or maybe not relevant to what it is that they want to write. How does that sound?
Okay, sir. So for I have looked at the comment that you give to me for my LP, and then there's a Versa text, I guess.
Yeah.
So can I use the Versa text, like I will give them a reading text, and then I will put the reading text in the Versa text, and then
That's right. Yep.
the list of the Versa text I will show to the students, and then the students can use the words like it is for noun, it is for object, it is for adjectives. So can I use it, sir?
So I mean, that's one way to do it. So you can certainly show them the different kind of language in isolation, as Versatext kind of puts everything in a nice table for you. But then if they want to look at other examples, as I already mentioned, that if you're just using one or two reading texts, then if you want students to get other examples of that word, then you may need a slightly larger data set. So as I said before, you might need like 10 such stories or 20 such stories. And then you can upload all of those to Versatext or Voyant tools and get your students then to look at the concordance examples. I think that would be the way to go.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, no worries. So thanks for that. I think we're now up to Nathania. Nathania H.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello there.
Yeah.
You're working from home.
Yes.
So you can hear my kids in the background going mad as well. So tell me about your lesson plan.
Okay. So may I share a screen?
Yeah, I have to stop sharing my screen, but you can share your screen if you like.
Is it okay?
Yeah,
I'm sorry if
so now you can share your screen.
Okay, wait. I will share the screen. Yes. So for my objective, I have 4 objectives.
Okay.
So first, I want my students to understand the generic structure, the social function, and the language features
of procedural texts.
Yeah, of the procedural text.
Yep.
Because first of all, they have to understand first. Because if they don't understand, how will they go to the next step, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And so after that, I want the students to be able to write their procedural text after they understand, after I give them the explanation or give them some pre-activities.
Yes.
They can produce their text with correct generic structure and grammatical pattern.
Okay.
So in these writing activities, first they have to work in groups, and second they have to work individually. Yeah.
Yes.
For the group work, they have to demonstrate their work on procedural text. Yeah. No. I mean, for the individual work, they have to demonstrate their work by record themselves for homework assignment.
Yep.
Like after they write the procedural text, of course, the procedural text needs to be they need to do that, right? So so they will have to record what they will doing.
Yep, with the text.
Like
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, this is another one of these lesson plans where we've got this generic structure again.
Yeah.
And as I said, you can work out generic structures with corpora, but it's quite complicated. So really, in this kind of situation, the teacher would go through and do some kind of analysis of like single texts, like the reading text, presumably, that you've got in here, and to try to label some of the structural elements of the texts. And then after you've labeled those, that's the time then when you can go and use the corpus to try to find examples that fit that kind of label. So, I mean, maybe do you have the actual procedure text there on your lesson plan? And if you do, could you scroll down to it?
Yes.
Can we have a look at that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Look. So you can see here we've got the steps.
Yes. Steps.
And actually here, I mean, the generic structure is actually, it's all imperative clauses, isn't it? So here, like combine instant coffee, sugar, and hot water. So then once you've got the preparation of the ingredients, maybe that could be like the first part. And you might look at then examples from a corpus as related to ingredient preparation.
Oh, yes. I
And
also
then,
use.
yeah, and then you've also got looking at putting this in versatext and looking at trying to get the verbs, because it's very verb. These texts are very verb heavy, and there's lots of variation in the verbs. So straight away here you've got combine, mix, use, whisk.
Like this, maybe.
Yeah, that's it.
This.
Yep. So if you go to the profiler, or right, or the word cloud. But if you go to the word cloud, actually, sorry, and just go back, and then scroll down a bit, and then just select verbs, and then that's going to give you then the verbs that you need to be learned. So then here, once you've got this part, then you can go ahead and use like Skell then to go and explore these particular verbs in more detail. So you've got there pour seems to be the most frequent verb. So then you go have a look at collocates of pour to see what kind of things can you pour, what kind of things can't you pour. So you could do pour and then look up some of the examples here. You can pour acid, lamp oil, or rain pours, water pours, pour powdered sugar. Okay. So then, and then another thing is you could try to look at the prepositions that occur with pour. So you've got this kind of construction: pour something onto or into. And then you could use like wildcards after that to see what kind of things you can pour something into. If you Skell unfortunately doesn't seem to do wildcards anymore, but if you did Sketch Engine or another corpus, or Lingual, for example, would be, you could have like pour noun, or their pour noun preposition, pour noun into, something like that. So taking those texts, you could do it in stages by putting the reading text into versatext, and then from versatext going ahead and getting students to explore some of these verbs in more detail. Could be a good way to just expand what it is that they were trying to do. Okay.
Yes.
But by looking at those concordances of that kind of thing, they could see, or hopefully they get to that kind of construction where they say, okay, many of the verbs in this, many of the sentences in this text are of the form noun, verb, direct object, and then the preposition phrase after that. So pour water into something. And then hopefully they get that kind of construction about how most of the sentences in this text seem to be structured in that way. And from once they figured that out, they can go ahead and try to write that kind of construction themselves later. Because I think the second task was to get them to write their own instruction text, wasn't it?
Oh, okay, sir.
Okay, but certainly, yeah, you've got where the technology can definitely help here. So certainly the examples in Skell, unlike the last lesson plan we just discussed with the previous participants, Skell does seem to give you quite good examples, maybe taken from recipes. I noticed in the concordances that we had open for Skell there that some of them did seem to be taken from recipe text, so that's quite useful. But yeah, definitely exploring the vocabulary and some of the concordances. So for example, if you click on pour, can you click on pour there?
Oh, yes.
And then that brings up the concordances, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Heat the milk and pour into the glass. Pour the milk into the glass. Pour and divide the coffee mixture. After you pour the milk, pour and divide the coffee mixture. You see, so we've got some good concordances there of that verb. And then, so we got 4 for pour, but then maybe some of the other verbs we might have to go to Skell to get more examples.
Yes.
Okay.
I was thinking like that too.
Yeah, great. Okay, so that's a very good way of making some of those recipes come to life and getting students to learn about some of the context that you use those verbs in. Because very often, especially with verb preposition combinations, are very hard for learners to work out. So is it pour onto, pour into, pour over, pour up, pour down? You know, they really struggle with that.
Yeah.
But the corpus will allow them to see the prepositions that come after the verbs that they need. So, yep, that sounds very good.
Yeah.
Let's move on now to.
Thank you, sir.
Yep, no worries. Thanks for sharing.
Yes.
So I think
You're welcome.
Who are we up to here on my list? We've had Nathania, Octaviana, Christy.
Okay, sir.
Okay, tell me about your lesson.
Okay, so for my objective, I have 3 objectives here. The first objective is students are able to understand the generic structure of the text. In here, I use narrative text.
Yes.
And the next is students are able to notice the past tense verb in the story. And the last objective is students are able to fill in the blank using the correct past tense verb.
Okay.
And here the corpus help us to find the meaning of some unfamiliar words. And in my lesson, I will use the corpus in the glossary part. So I let the students to share their unfamiliar words or new words for them, and then together with the students, I will use the corpus to discuss that unfamiliar words from the students.
Yes. Yeah, so I remember I did put that into some of your lesson plans where in some of the scripted dialogues you had, you said, okay, are there any words here you don't understand? And then the students would say yes or no. And then the teacher would then try to explain them themselves, but then getting the students to consult the corpus then to work out the meaning is a more interactive way of doing that, isn't it?
Oh, okay, sir.
So yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. Will they be doing anything else?
No, because I use the corpus in the glossary part. So
yep. Okay.
Yeah.
But they could also use it as a reference resource when they're actually doing the writing as well.
Ah, okay, sir. Okay, thank you, sir, for the
Okay, thanks very much. Where's my participant list here? We've got Riza.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, so let's hear about your lesson plan.
So my objective, I'll teach secondary school learners. So my objective are the students are able to understand the generic structure, social function, and language structure, and also analyze the use of words from the text. I will use scale and also concordance because I think I'll check their vocabulary knowledge because my focusing skill is listening, so they have to find new vocabulary from the text and I mean the audio text and also unfamiliar words. So they have to analyze the use of words from the example on the scale and also concordance because they from them there will be different example from different contexts.
Mm-hmm. So I guess because the main focus of the lesson is listening, I guess that you just got to make a decision about when the corpus activity is going to happen. So are you going to use the corpus activity before listening so that you're kind of priming that vocabulary for them to look out for, and then they do the listening and hope for, and that vocabulary should be in there? So that's one way you can do it. Or they could do the listening activity first and then try to focus on words that were unfamiliar during the listen activity and use the corpus to kind of consolidate their knowledge of what they couldn't understand from the listening. So there's two options here, or you could even do both. So I think the main thing here is just about the timing of the corpus activity. Am I going to put it before the listening task to kind of warm them up to some of the vocab or grammar that's going to show up in the listening? Or am I going to use the corpus after the listening to consolidate what they need to get from that listening task? So what's your idea there? Which way do you think you're going to go?
I'm gonna use the scale and also concordance after the listening part.
After the listening part. Okay, so that's good. So we just need to make sure that after the listening task, there'll be some kind of interaction with the students to say, okay, what did you get from the listening? What were you not sure about? And then you can get the things that you have to search for from discussing with the students, or you can pre-select what they're going to search for based on what the vocabulary that was in the listening script. So there's two ways to do it. One, you can ask them to kind of think about the words that they heard but they don't know.
Yes, this one.
Okay, so you're going to try it the first way. Yeah, so that's good. Yeah. Right, yeah, so it's just a question of timing and then where do you put that task in. So very good. Thanks very much for that.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, up to Ranga.
Hello, sir. Good evening there.
Yep, hello
okay,
there.
So I'm going to present my objectives. So I actually have 3 objectives.
Yep.
And I am teaching primary school learners.
Yes.
So, okay, I will explain it one by one. So the first one, students will be able to get the understanding about directions by recognizing the types of the short expressions in the short text provided during the presentation. So my text will be classified as recount text. And then next, students will be able to make use of directions properly by completing which way that the person should take in an exercise. And the last one, students will be able to describe about how to reach a location in their house by making a short paragraph.
Okay.
So that is what my
the objectives
is all about.
So where is the corpus going to be used?
Okay.
What kind of data are you planning to use?
So here I will explain you how will the corpus meet my teaching.
Yep.
So at first, during the presentation, I am thinking that students could acquire a corpus for the expression of directions to recognize the types of it. So I'm going to use scale. They're going to search for directions. An example, maybe turn right, turn left, something.
Yep.
That's what I'm going to use.
Okay.
And then I'm going to implement the corpus also for the last part. So since students have to describe about how to reach a location in their house, making a short paragraph,
Yep.
I think they can use it, corpus, as a reference
Yes.
research during writing.
Yes, they can.
So as an addition, when I'm explaining them about the theories, I also want them to look at the corpus, the scale.
Yeah.
What the example is for example, if they search turn right and then what the sentence is, they could implement the word from there.
Yeah, some different examples about how you can turn right or what kind of things you would turn right into or something like that. So the thing with direction is that students very often aren't sure about how the verb goes with the preposition.
Yes.
So go up, go down, go over, go between is very confusing. And here is a great way for students to be able to look for verb preposition collocates. So searching by part of speech would be very useful. Scale doesn't really let you do that, I think, at the moment, but something like Lingual will certainly do that, and Sketch Engine will definitely do that. Or if you don't want to search by part of speech, at least using the verb plus the wildcard, but that might not give you prepositions. But certainly if you search for verb, then preposition. So maybe if you type the verb in like go, and then you add in as the next word, you add in the preposition part of speech tag in your search. And if you're not sure how to do that, again, you just go back onto the online course in module 2. There's instructions about how to search by part of speech. And you can also search very easily part of speech in Lingual. There are instructions about how to do that. And then that will give you those different prepositions that go with that verb. And that's the bit that with directions, it's those verb preposition collocations. Learners find those really hard, and a corpus could really help to generate lists of the different prepositions that can occur with those verbs, and then you can get examples of each of that type as well. And then students can also, for example, enter in combinations that they think are correct, and then look at the output and think, okay, maybe that's not what I wanted after all.
Sir, but is it okay if I use scale to let them make an example?
I mean,
for example,
absolutely, yes. So as I've said, though, the only thing is that sometimes these things can mean different things in different contexts. So, for example, a particular verb preposition combination when you're giving directions might have a different meaning for if you're using it in another context, like in a business report or some other kind of text. So you might have to be careful that the examples that you get from scale are really related to directions and don't have another meaning, because again, in English, those kind of combinations can have multiple meanings depending on the context. So just be careful. Maybe you want to select the examples, the appropriate examples from the corpus, and provide the right ones to your students. Because if the students see, it can be quite overwhelming for the students to get lots of examples, but then they see suddenly, oh, well, that's not about a direction, that means something else, and they might start to get a little confused. So you may want to, in the beginning stages, if you are using scale, just try to select the best examples yourself and present those to the students. So that's just some advice there.
I also limit the direction into a certain context, so it's not like the direction universally, but it's just like for, you know, some context.
Yes.
Like
Well, the context will help you to understand if it's being used in the way that you want it to be used or not.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, so just make sure when you update your lesson plan that you take that into account. Okay,
Yes.
I think
Thank you, sir.
we've only got a few left. Stanley.
Yes.
Hello, Stanley. Are you presenting a lesson plan today?
Yep.
You are. Okay, so what were the objectives of your lesson plan?
So my objective for my lesson plan, because I'm teaching argumentative text.
Is this for secondary school?
Yes, for
Okay.
secondary school.
Yep.
Argumentative text, or in short, analytical hortatory text.
Yep.
So I'm teaching them the language features, which is the linking adverbials, like at on the other, therefore. So it's pretty useful in argumentative text. And then I'm teaching them about how to create argumentative text using those language features.
Yep.
That's my objective.
Okay.
And
so
for
what's the where's the corpus going to come in?
And for the corpus, so before I'm asking them to create their own argumentative text, so I provide them some kind of input, which is a video about argumentative speech and the transcript, and I ask them to give some underline to the linking adverbials, and I ask them to check the linking adverbials usage on the corpus, like on the other, because in Indonesian we don't use so in front of the sentence, so it might be different for Indonesians and for Indonesian and English.
Yes.
That's
so it's a good way to see how that's used.
Yeah.
And to let them know that that is a thing in English. So if it shows up 50 times in the data, then you can be sure that that's how we do it, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. And I also use the corpus data to check about the new words of the text, so I can check the frequency of the words, whether this text is difficult for secondary students or not.
Yes, with the Versa text allows you to do that. So whether if the vocabulary is in the top 1,000, then it's supposedly easier than text that have a lot of words in the 2,000 list, or in the words that are too text specific. It's a good way to control the textful level then. Okay. So very interesting there, Stanley.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we'll just move on. We're just running out of time. I think I've got 2 left. So Vanya?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, let's hear about your plan.
So I'm going to teach recount text and...
What kind of text, sorry?
Recount text.
What's that?
Recount text, so you tell about an experience that is unforgettable.
Oh, I understand. Okay. And what are your objectives?
My objectives, the first one, classify the generic structure of recount text.
Again, here's that generic structure thing again, right? Okay.
Yeah. And then answer the comprehension questions.
Okay.
And then fill the blanks based from the grammar focus. So I'm going to the grammar focus is simple past tense.
Yes. And where is the corpus coming in?
The corpus I use corpus sketch engine, word sketch for fill the blanks.
Okay.
The grammar focus.
So you're using that to generate the blanks yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, that's something actually that none of you have mentioned so far. because all of your focus has been on getting the students to use the corpus. But what Vanya is doing here is to use the corpus to get the examples for the blanks. So that's that more indirect use of the corpus there. But that's very it's an interesting development. Were you going to get the students to consult the corpus themselves at any point?
Yes.
And what's your plan for that?
So after they find the words that I want,
yes,
they need to consult with me first, and then if I said yes, they can use the words. If I said no, they cannot use the words.
Okay. I'm not sure what you mean there exactly. So why would you say no?
I mean, like if they find a word that is not simple past tense, then I would say no. You cannot. You cannot
Okay.
use that.
I understand.
I mean, like that.
Yeah. So then maybe they could use the corpus to check if it was past tense or not?
Yes.
I mean, they could look at the part of speech tag, for example. So if it was past simple, it would be VVD, I think, or VVB. I don't remember exactly the tag, but in Voyant, Versatext will provide you with the tags, and so will Sketch Engine. And they could check then if that verb is actually the past tense verb, or something else they can do if they're not comfortable with part of speech. Part of teachers to put the base form of the verb, like go, and then put the star. So here it would be went, so it wouldn't necessarily work. Or they might get going or gone, but they wouldn't get went. But then if they put in, for example, dive, but put in the star, then it might come back with we dived or something like that. So just again, they can play around with either part of speech searches or wildcards to help them see, to check if their words are being used in past tense or not.
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. So we've got one left. I think that's Weedy. Are you there, Weedy?
She's a lecturer, sir.
Okay, great. So we have gone through everybody then. So Araphelia, Axel, I think there was one other as well who didn't, we weren't able to chat to, but maybe you can then send me what it was you were trying to do by email so that you can then incorporate the comments before you have to submit the final part of the lesson plan. Okay, good. So with the time that we've got left now, we're gonna get you going into groups, and I already asked you to come up with individually kind of thinking about how easy or difficult it would be to do some of the things that you plan to do, and to think about why it might be difficult. What is the cause of the difficulty? So is it that you don't have the technology? Is it that the students don't have access to computer lab, or they don't have pads or something like that? Maybe the internet isn't particularly good in your province. Maybe you feel, or teachers in general don't have time for this kind of thing, or you're not sure if the students can handle it. You're not sure if the students will be interested. Are there any other kind of factors that you think your students might benefit from, you know, in terms of meeting their curriculum objectives at the wider level, helping improve teachers and students' information technology skills, awareness? Is it something that you think your students or your learners in your context would really benefit from? Or what are some of the problems that you think you might encounter? So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes here. And what I'd like the people in each room to do is, if one person in the group can kind of open up a Microsoft Word document and just try to make notes based on what everybody's saying, from enablers and barriers. So enablers are kind of like positive aspects, why we need to do this, and then barriers, negative points, why it might be hard. So if one person in each group can kind of be the note taker and just jot down notes, and then at the end, when the breakout rooms are over, then we'll kind of compare notes. I will take a kind of master note list based on what people are saying, and that'll take us up almost then to the end of the session. So just to give yourselves, and especially to give me as well, an understanding of whether you think you can manage this or not. Probably for those people who are not from Atma Jaya, like Toy is here. Arimbi, I think you probably join in, I guess. But Toy, you probably might want to leave at this point. Same with Amelia as well, because I'm going to let the participants speak in their native language here, not in English. So if you're not Indonesian, it's probably a good time to leave the session at this point. And because there's no more content to go through at this point. So this will be really focused on kind of Indonesia specific issues, unless you just want to kind of mute and stay quiet. And then at the end, when we're all back together, you can chip in then with your own individual comments related to your own country. Let's do that then. I think that would be the best way to manage it, rather than just booting you out unnecessarily. So I'm going to start to make the rooms now. Please discuss this in your own language, and I'll try and jump into the rooms just to see that everybody's doing it properly. So again, if one person in the group just has a kind of Word document open like this and just shares the screen with the others and just take notes. So is everybody ready? Think hopefully we are. Then I'm just gonna start going now with the breakout rooms. So how do we do this? Let's get that 5. Well, we'll split you up into 4 rooms with 5 to 6 participants per person, and I will set the timer for 15 minutes. Yep. And then I will just head in then, and I'll come and try and observe each of you. Although, obviously you'll be speaking Indonesian. So, okay. All right. Thanks, Amelia and Toy. Thanks for that. Then otherwise I will, I'll talk to you guys later. But for now, I'll get started with the rooms here. So you'll see a sign just saying you've been invited to a breakout room. Just click that, and then you'll go straight into the room. All right, here we go. And I'm going to stop the recording here. So we'll just have a think first of all about the positive aspects of this approach, whether you think that you can reasonably incorporate corpus use into your lesson planning. What are some of the positive aspects that will give to you as an individual teacher? What are some of the positive things that might bring to your students, or maybe at the macro level, thinking about your school, institution, even at the country level? How will this approach help you? So let's get some ideas from the different groups. So you can unmute your microphones and just chip in with what you managed to discuss.
All right, I think I want to start.
Okay.
To share. For my group, the students can recognize the grammatical errors and check it by using corpus.
Yep, that's for sure.
Yes. And then students will be easier to identify the meaning of the new words by using corpus.
Yep.
Okay, should I continue or give it to the others?
Was that all the enablers you had?
No, actually, my group has 7 enablers, 7
Well,
positive.
let's hear them. Let's hear them.
Okay, so the next one is students can explore by themselves about the tenses using corpus.
Okay.
The fourth one is students are able to know more about the use of the words in the vocabulary.
Yep, use of vocabulary. Yep, okay.
Yeah. And then the fifth one is students can find the suitable words in the context from the corpus.
Yep.
The next one is students can find many examples and lots of collocation and phrases in engrams, for example.
Yep.
The last one is it's easier to use corpus than the printed dictionary and faster to be accessed.
Okay. So all of these are obviously very good. Most of these are from the student's perspective. What about from the teacher's perspective? Did anybody get why this approach might be useful for teachers particularly? So again, I think most of these are things that the students will benefit from. What about from the teacher's perspective? Did anybody get anything like that?
Okay, this is Stanley.
Okay.
So one of the things that we discuss is we can learn about the derivation of the words. For instance, the learners might ask, why don't go words get along with ed so we can go it? So we can let the students check and prove it using the corpus. That's one of the functions from the teacher.
So in some way, it takes the pressure off the teachers, right?
Yeah.
To provide those kind of answers, to provide answers to complex or unfamiliar things, like collocation, for example. Why does this word not go with this word? And teacher might just go, well, I don't know. That's just the rule. But then that doesn't help very much, right? So say, okay, we'll go and find out for yourself. So that's one. Yep. Okay. Anything else?
The second is we can check the frequency of the words, because certain words has lower frequency or higher frequency than the others.
Yeah.
And for instance, we are teaching the primary level learners, and we have to choose the appropriate text for them, so we can check it directly.
Yep. So check the frequency of the words or appropriacy of text for leveling purposes is definitely something that this can help with. That's right. Very often in the textbook, you'll get some expressions that you just think, well, my students are never going to know that now, and so why am I teaching it to them? I was very, very surprised. I had an experience doing these same workshops for teachers in Australia. And these are teachers of English as an additional language or dialect. It's called EALD. And the stuff that they were doing, the text that they had to use with their learners was so hard that there's no, I mean, even they admitted that there's no way they could get their learners to read and understand these texts. And they had real terrible trouble because that's what was on the curriculum. And they had to find some way of teaching these sometimes quite low-level learners about very complex things like literary texts, like How to Kill a Mockingbird and things like that. And I was very shocked at how difficult that was. So being able to consult corporate to find out difficulty of vocabulary or the difficulty of text is going to be a very useful tool. Okay, were there any other comments here? Stanley, did you have any others, or was that all?
Yeah, one more.
One more.
It can help us to create some kind of meaningful sentences for instance, we are providing them a worksheet with fill in the blanks rather than we are creating our own sentences, which might be nonsense.
Yeah.
So we can create a meaningful sentences for our worksheets.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the main proposed benefits of corpora is that the examples that you're pulling out are authentic, or it's authentic data. So it's not ones that you made up or ones that might be inappropriate or ones that are these are taken from real language data in the target language. Okay. Yep, still doing well for time. Anybody else have any comments about so we've talked about some from the teacher's perspective. What about in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of language teaching in Indonesia specifically?
Sir, I think
yes.
Sir, I think I would like to add something from my group.
Yes.
Actually, this is also a question for me and maybe for the others.
Yeah.
So somehow in Indonesia, in a certain school environment, schools the schools may not allow students to bring their own gadgets. So when a teacher asks them to use Corpus, they have to use a technology, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem, actually.
Okay.
So how is it possible?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I was going to discuss barriers later, but now that you've mentioned this, we can make a start already. And yeah, so this kind of institutional policy,
yes,
related to device use in the class. Obviously, in this case, then the teacher's going to have to do the work of bringing the data to the students. So the students might not be able to go and consult concordances, but the teacher can go and extract some concordances that they find useful and do it by pen and paper. And there's lots of studies published. In fact, a lot of the studies that are in the book, the Data-Driven Learning for Younger Learners book that I wrote, or that I edited, the teachers were printing the results of the corpus search and then giving them to students to read as printouts. So that's the way around very strict institutional policies. But obviously, the bigger issue is whether you as teachers need to be able to allow for exemptions for special purposes. So, or whether you're able to get some kind of budget or money together to allow students to maybe share a few iPads or some computers in the room, or if there's a computer lab in your school to devote part of the week to doing the corpus task in that environment, like a computer lab or something like that. But whether that's possible or not will depend on whether you have access to that kind of thing. But it's a very good question. Out of interest, for everybody here, how many of your schools have that kind of policy? Is it most of you or all of you or just some of you? Again, I think you can run a poll on that. I might run a poll on that later. I haven't done a poll before.
Yeah.
Here it is.
In some cases, Peter, maybe they have the English lab. So it can be one of the solutions for the students to work with the technology.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
So through a kind of lab setup. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. Do all schools have something like that, or is just the ones in the cities, or?
Usually only the ones in the city then.
Okay, so we'll get on to issues of kind of rural communities later. So just going back there about the kind of aspects for language teaching in Indonesia in general, how might this approach help that? Thinking more of a kind of like the objectives, helping teachers and students meet their curricular objectives and that kind of thing. Did anybody have any comments on that from their groups? If not,
No, sir.
Yes. Hello?
No, sir. I don't have any comment.
Oh, okay, right. So, but maybe that's something that we need to think about. Maybe when we conduct some interviews later, we could ask a question about that, about how you think that might contribute to the development of English language teaching in Indonesia in general, like to help raise the profile of the profession, so to speak. And that's something that we haven't really talked about yet. So let's move on then to the barriers. And we already mentioned things like students not allowed to bring gadgets as part of institutional policies. Now, we also talked a little bit a moment ago about access to technology in rural areas. Is anybody here currently working or plan to work in a rural area? If so, do you think you would have the access to the technology to be able to do this kind of thing? What kind of problems can you see happening? Anybody can respond here. You just have to unmute your microphone. Or maybe you have any other comments related to barriers. Why might it be difficult?
Well, I think I have any idea related to the rural area. Okay, so the technology in a rural area, it is kind of rare to find, and especially about the signal, it's not really, I found out that if it's in rural area, it's not really have a good signal. You know what I mean?
Yep. So the internet bandwidth, it's poor.
Yeah.
In rural areas. Okay.
And
so with that in mind, I mean, then if you can get at least one good computer with internet bandwidth, then one of the strategies is maybe to use something quite basic like AntConc, which then that doesn't need an internet connection. So once you've downloaded it the first time and you have your text data, then you can get the students to use AntConc to explore things like concordances and keywords and collocations and multi-word units, and you wouldn't need an internet connection to do that. So you can go with the wherever something like Voyant Tools is very nice and fancy and runs all online, but if you don't have the internet connection, something like AntConc can really help there. And you were going to say something else?
Well, and whether it's in a rural area or not, we have to give the students a clear explanation so they can follow what are we talking about, something like that.
Okay. Do you feel that your students would be able to do this kind of thing given their current technical abilities? Are students in Indonesia quite happy to use technology generally for other things?
Well, I think it is gonna be more interesting for them if they use technology rather than the traditional one. You know, like using book and dictionary is gonna be boring to them. Yes.
Yep. So that's actually an enabler, isn't it, really? So students need to use meaningful technologies, right, to make things more exciting.
Yes.
What about from a teacher perspective? And this question goes out to everyone. Do you think that this would take up more or less time in thinking about in terms of curriculum or workload or time constraints? Your lesson plans all sound fantastic, and they don't sound like they would really take that much effort to do at all. But what are your feelings on this? Do you think that this approach, that the teachers generally have time to be able to do something like this, or do you think that it's more kind of a dream or an ideal situation, and maybe after your training you probably wouldn't do this because of time constraints? What are your thoughts here? So thinking about it from that curriculum workload point of view, or anything related to assessment or testing in your country, for example. What are your thoughts here? Does anybody have any other comments?
Sir, I have comment. I think if using corpus in class will take a long time, because at first we have to explain about using corpus, and then because we have a time limit, I think it will take a long time, sir.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's it.
So we do have time constraints. So it's one of those things, isn't it? In some ways, it does take a bit longer in the beginning, but in other ways, it probably saved time later on, because usually in most of the research that's out there, and in my own experience, the amount of time you actually need to train learners in the basics is just a matter of hours, really. It really doesn't take very long to train them at all before they just go off and start to use the stuff on their own. But then for, say, lesson planning or making teaching materials, or coming out for trying to work out what vocabulary or grammar you're going to use in each lesson, the corpus can actually speed that process up a lot, so that you probably find that over the course of a semester or a teaching year, you may have saved a lot more time than you would have spent without using the corpus. That's just been my experience so far, at least. But it's not the same for everybody, of course. Does anybody have any other comments on barriers here? Are there any other reasons you can think of? Yes, of course.
In my group, we discussed about the learners' proficiency, because the learners, when the learners are using corpus, they're viewing it in English language, not in their first language.
Yes.
It might be difficult for the younger learners or learners with lower level proficiency to use corpus, because it's similar, like you are reading a dictionary from English to Indonesia to into English to English. So it might be harder for the lower level proficiency.
So I mean, what do they do now to overcome that problem without using a corpus? What do they do?
Yeah, most of them are using the Indonesian app, English to Indonesian dictionary.
Yeah.
Most of them.
Yeah. So how is that working out for them?
Working out.
Does it work? I mean, does it help them?
Well, it helps them,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's troublesome because in dictionary you have a list of words.
Yeah.
How many?
Yeah.
So the solution might be, after you are checking the dictionary for the list of words, you're checking also the context.
Yeah.
With the corpus.
Yeah. So I mean, the argument that I always give back to that is in terms of, well, you know, students might find it difficult. I say, okay, what are they using now? Okay, they're using a translation website or they're using a dictionary, and I'm like, is that currently solving the problems that they're having? And when you ask teachers, the answer 9 times out of 10 is no. They still can't write. They still make the same mistakes over and over again. They still don't know what words to use. So sticking with the current situation isn't helping. So adding this, and I'm not saying that they need to replace what they're currently using. I wouldn't advise that at all. But certainly adding this to the suite of tools that they already use now should help them to solve some of those problems that they're not able to solve with their translation websites or their dictionaries, and having that as a tool. Now, in terms of the proficiency argument, I mean, because there's 2 kinds of proficiency. There's the technical proficiency to use the corpus, which I actually find the students pick up very, very quickly. Then the other issue is about their proficiency in English. And then that really depends on the corpus data that you're using. So for example, unless you've got a function like good dictionary examples, the GDEX function in Sketch Engine, then some of the examples from kind of regular corpus data can be very, very difficult for students to understand. So you wouldn't be giving students examples from, say, the British Academic Written English corpus, right? Because it would be too difficult for them. So that's where you need to be able to source data that is produced at their level, such as graded readers or the kind of sample text that you're using in your own lessons, and to make corpora of those texts and get students to use those. Because then you can be sure that by controlling for, say, the frequency of the vocabulary in the text through tools like Versatext, or making sure that you've taken all of your text from, say, level 3 or level 4 or whatever level system you're using in your country or your school, then you can be sure that the examples that students are getting out of the corpus are then appropriate for them, right? So yeah, definitely learners' proficiency technically and learners' English proficiency will definitely be something that you have to think about. But it shouldn't stop you from trying this, I think is what I'm trying to say. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. We still got a little bit of extra time. Do we have any other comments, either on enablers or barriers? You've got a good list so far.
Peter, if I may add one more thing, it's actually the first time you were introducing the corpus to students, and we were talking about that. It's changing actually the way they learn. So at the deep level, we are talking about the learning paradigm.
Yes.
That's actually the major challenge that we are trying to anticipate later if we have time to try it out at schools.
Yes.
Because so far, in the college, the students are trained to understand several approaches which are more communicative. But when it comes to school, they get stuck again. I have to be honest with you, teachers can be the way they think, the way they teach, one of the major aspects that we are considering.
Yeah.
But hopefully, bit by bit, by introducing the benefits,
yes,
I'm quite optimistic we help them to change.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
So I think, yeah, it's very important. And this is at the kind of cultural level, or the level at the bigger level of education in Indonesia, about the way students are typically taught and the way students expect to learn in school. And it's all very well, as you say, to just say, oh, we're going to try this new thing and it's going to promote all this higher order thinking and all of this. But the question is, are the students ready for that at present? Or the other question is, are the teachers ready for that? Are the teachers ready to be trying to do that for their students? And then at the wider level, does the curriculum allow for that? While for example, in terms of the assessment or testing regime, for example, I worked in South Korea for many years, for example, and at the earlier levels of education, say elementary and middle school, they do wonderful things. They try lots of new things. They're open to suggestions. But as soon as they get into high school, then suddenly that all goes away, and it's back to rote memorizing everything for their high school test. And it's a real shame, because you see they lose that motivation, and then they just stuck memorizing things until midnight, and it really changes the way they learn, because suddenly they've got to prepare for that high school test, and there's no time or place for anything that might disrupt that. So later on, when we send a questionnaire out tomorrow about your experiences on these training seminars, and if you're interviewed about your experience, this is the kind of thing that we'd like to hear about. You know, what is happening in Indonesia like that might make this kind of thing difficult? Is there an established way of thinking or way of teaching that is very set? Perhaps older teachers, for example, may feel that they want to teach a particular way, and that's the way they've always taught it. Or younger teachers may feel that they don't have time, given the constraints of the curriculum, to be able to do things like this. So that's the kind of information that I'm interested from here on out, is once we learn those barriers, then from that point, we can start to take steps to overcome them and open things up and try and improve the situation. And the corpus use is just one aspect of that.
Exactly.
But there's actually a lot more going on that we can do to try to make sure that that we can change things for the better, and just raise the general level of Indonesian learners, not just for English learning, but in all areas of their education. So, right. So I guess we're pretty much out of time then here for this session. I'll just bring it to a close by going to the summary slides here. And just to summarize what we've been doing the last 3 weeks, we've looked at why and how corpora can be used in the class, trialed a range of tools on how to build and consult our own corpora. We've looked this week at how they can be integrated in materials, curriculum preparation, and in-class student-led use. And we very briefly touched on some of the specific conditions and requirements facing teachers in the Indonesian context, and we definitely like to hear more about that in the future. So what is next? Well, for me, there are kind of 4 main areas. One is to secure funding to expand the training that we're doing here, maybe within this particular institution or maybe nationwide, to see how corpora can benefit education in Indonesia, both within and outside of the teaching context, English teaching context. Maybe to find some way to secure funding to provide access to more resources, although I think given the current coronavirus situation, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And really, the next step that I'd like to join with you all one day, hopefully in the future, and hopefully in the not so distant future, is to come and see how you end up using this with your learners, what you end up doing, to see whether you really end up using this kind of technology in your own teaching, and if so, what happens? What do the learners benefit? What do the learners think? What do they think about it all? Are they positive or negative? Do you see benefits to the learning? Really, with younger learners outside of university, so especially at the primary school level and still at the secondary school level, we still need lots more data on how students are using this in classroom situations. So I hope in the future that is something that we can all work on together. And should you, I mean, we'll be in touch again anyway. But again, if this is something that maybe, if not right now, maybe 6 months time, a year's time, you think you want to still work together with me on this, or in your schools, when you're actually doing your job in your schools, send me an email. We'd love to hear more from you, and maybe we can work on something together in your school or in your context. So thanks very much for listening. I think my voice is about to go now, but it's been a good 3 weeks, and I hope you've all found this very useful. And I look forward to hearing more from you in your questionnaires and in the interviews that will come up later. So thanks again, and all the best.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Thank you so much.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So I'm gonna turn off the recording then, and